The hum of anticipation filled the sleek, glass-walled conference room at TechFuture Incorporated. Senior engineers, marketing executives, and board members chatted in low murmurs, flipping through printed copies of the agenda. In the middle of it all stood Marcus Johnson, a man whose crisp navy suit did little to conceal his nerves. His hands hovered near the edges of his laptop, steadying himself as he prepared to present the project that had consumed his nights and weekends for months. "All right, everyone." Richard Kane's commanding voice sliced through the room as he entered. The CEO, with his tailored gray suit and air of absolute authority, sauntered to the head of the table. The chatter died instantly. Richard didn't look at Marcus, but his smirk spoke volumes. "This better be good," Richard said, finally meeting Marcus's eyes as he adjusted his chair. "Time is money, people, and I don't waste either on pipe dreams." A faint chuckle rippled through the room, but Marcus stood firm, gripping the edges of the table for support. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the tension. "What I'm about to show you isn't a pipe dream. It's a solution. A groundbreaking one." Richard leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Let's see it, then." Marcus launched into his pitch, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. He described the potential of his AI system, an intuitive algorithm that could monitor energy grids in real time, predict failures before they occurred, and reroute power to avoid blackouts. This could save billions in repair costs and prevent outages that disrupt millions of lives, Marcus said, his passion undeniable. "It's not just a tool, it's a transformation." The room was silent, eyes fixed on Marcus as he showcased a simulation on the screen. The technology worked flawlessly, predicting hypothetical grid failures and suggesting precise interventions. A junior engineer at the back of the room muttered, "That's impressive, too low for most to hear." But Richard's laughter filled the space like a thunderclap. "Are you serious?" Richard scoffed, leaning forward with a theatrical shake of his head. "Marcus, you've been watching too many sci-fi movies?" Marcus froze, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "Excuse me," he managed, his voice faltering. Richard waved a dismissive hand toward the screen. This is fantasy. Predictive AI for energy grids? It's not feasible. Not with the kind of infrastructure we're dealing with. And even if it were, do you have any idea how much it would cost to implement something like this? Billions. And for what? A few avoided outages? A few avoided outages? Marcus's frustration broke through. "Mr. Kane, this isn't about minor inconveniences. It's about stability, reliability. Lives are impacted every time the power goes out, especially in critical industries like hospitals. And who's footing the bill for this grand vision of yours?" Richard interrupted, his tone razor-sharp. "You think investors are just going to hand over money for a project with no guarantee of ROI? That's not how the real world works, Marcus." The words landed like a slap, but Marcus refused to back down. "The potential ROI is enormous. The cost savings alone." Richard cut him off again, now addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a perfect example of why we need to focus on practical ideas. Sure, it's flashy, but flashy doesn't pay the bills. What we need are solutions we can implement now, not some hypothetical pipe dream that'll bankrupt us before it sees the light of day." A murmur of agreement spread through the room, though a few faces betrayed unease. Marcus looked at them, searching for support, but no one met his gaze. "I don't believe this," Marcus said under his breath, but Richard heard him. "What was that, Marcus?" Richard's tone was cold, daring him to speak louder. "I said I don't believe this," Marcus replied, his voice firmer now. He stood straighter, meeting Richard's eyes. "You asked for innovation, and when I deliver it, you dismiss it without a second thought. This isn't about feasibility, is it? You just don't want to take a risk. Or worse, you don't want to admit someone else might have a better idea than you?" The room went silent. Richard's smirk faded, replaced by a glare that could freeze fire. "You'd better watch yourself," Richard said slowly. "This company doesn't run on idealism, Marcus. It runs on results. And right now, you're wasting everyone's time." "Then let me prove it," Marcus countered, his voice rising. "Give me the resources to build a prototype. Let me show you." You don't get it, do you? Richard interrupted, standing now. His towering presence loomed over Marcus. This is my company. I decide what's worth pursuing. And this isn't it. Richard turned to the board members seated around the table. Let's move on to the next agenda item. We've already spent too long on this nonsense. Marcus stood there, stunned. His cheeks burned with humiliation as he looked at the faces around him. Most were blank, a few sympathetic, but none daring enough to challenge Richard's authority. As the meeting transitioned to other topics, Marcus quietly gathered his laptop and notes. His pulse pounded in his ears, and his vision blurred with a mix of anger and shame. Marcus, a soft voice called as he stepped out of the conference room. It was Emma, a fellow engineer and one of the few colleagues he trusted. Don't, he said, holding up a hand. I don't need a pep talk right now. Emma hesitated, then stepped closer. That was brutal, but you can't let it end here. Your idea. Doesn't matter. Marcus cut her off, his voice bitter. Not here. Not to them. Emma lowered her voice. Then don't stop. Work on it outside of this place. Prove them wrong. Marcus looked at her, his jaw tight. He wanted to believe her, but the sting of humiliation was still too fresh. Thanks, Emma, he said after a moment, his tone softer. But I need to figure this out on my own. As Marcus walked away, the echo of Richard's laughter followed him down the hallway. But beneath his frustration and shame, something sparked, something that felt a lot like resolve. Marcus sat in his cramped apartment later that evening, staring at the glowing lines of code on his laptop. The faint hum of the city outside his window was a stark contrast to the chaos of his thoughts. Richard Kane's condescending laughter replayed in his mind like a broken record. Not feasible, Marcus muttered under his breath, shaking his head. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He had two choices: let Richard's words crush him, or prove him wrong. The decision wasn't easy. Marcus had been at TechFuture for 6 years, long enough to know how the game was played. Richard had a way of controlling the narrative. Challenging him meant stepping into a dangerous spotlight. But every time Marcus thought about giving up, he remembered the faces of those board members. Their silence. Their complicity. He exhaled sharply and began typing. The next day, Marcus kept his head low at the office, avoiding Richard and his cronies. The air in the TechFuture building was cold, not just from the overzealous air conditioning, but from the unspoken hierarchy that loomed over every department. As Marcus walked to his desk, he heard murmurs from the break room. He really thought Kane would back him? Classic rookie mistake. Kane doesn't care about innovation unless it comes from him. Marcus paused, his grip on his coffee mug tightening. He knew they were talking about him. Yeah, but you've got to hand it to Marcus. The idea was solid. A third voice chimed in, quieter. And where did it get him? The first voice snapped. Publicly humiliated. He's lucky Kane didn't fire him on the spot. Marcus stepped into the break room, his face unreadable. The group fell silent, suddenly engrossed in their phones and coffee cups. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That evening, Marcus found himself back at his laptop. A blank page stared back at him, daring him to quit. Instead, he opened a private folder labeled Project Sentinel. He had started drafting the idea months ago, long before the ill-fated presentation. Now, with Richard's rejection fresh in his mind, Marcus felt a new surge of determination. If TechFuture didn't want his innovation, someone else would. For weeks, he worked tirelessly. By day, he fulfilled his duties at TechFuture, performing the bare minimum to stay under the radar. By night, he poured every ounce of energy into Project Sentinel. His savings began to dwindle as he purchased servers and rented cloud computing space to test the algorithms. The exhaustion was palpable, but so was the progress. Late one night, Marcus leaned back in his chair and watched his program predict a simulated grid failure with pinpoint accuracy. A weary smile tugged at his lips. "I knew it," he whispered. Meanwhile, TechFuture was unraveling. Rumors of declining revenue and stalled projects spread through the office. Richard Kane seemed oblivious, continuing to shoot down ideas from engineers who dared to think outside the box. The company's once innovative reputation was slipping, and Marcus couldn't help but notice. One afternoon, Emma approached him at his desk, her brow furrowed. "Have you seen the latest reports?" she asked, sliding a printed sheet toward him. Marcus skimmed the document. TechFuture stock had dropped another 5%, and analysts were beginning to question the company's long-term viability. "Kane must be feeling the pressure," Marcus said, his tone neutral. Emma leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I heard he's calling emergency meetings with the board. They're demanding a strategy to turn things around." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, more budget cuts and buzzwords." Emma smiled faintly, but quickly grew serious. "You're still working on it, aren't you? The project?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Good," she said. "Because if there was ever a time to prove him wrong, it's now." A few weeks later, Marcus attended a small tech conference on a whim. He hadn't told anyone at TechFuture, especially not Richard. Using his personal savings, he had secured a modest booth to showcase an early prototype of Project Sentinel. The space was unassuming, just a table, a laptop, and a simple banner that read, "AI-driven energy solutions, preventing tomorrow's blackouts today." Most attendees walked past without a second glance. But one man, a wiry figure with sharp eyes and a badge labeled investor, stopped. "Interesting pitch," the man said, gesturing to the banner. "What makes your solution different from existing systems?" Marcus launched into an explanation, detailing the predictive capabilities of his algorithm and its scalability across diverse energy grids. The man nodded, his interest clearly piqued. "Have you tested it in a real-world scenario?" he asked. "Not yet," Marcus admitted. "But the simulations have been consistently accurate." The man handed Marcus a business card. "If you're looking for funding, give me a call." "This has potential." Marcus stared at the card as the man walked away, a mix of excitement and disbelief coursing through him. For the first time, someone outside of TechFuture believed in his vision. Back at the office, Marcus kept his success quiet. But Emma noticed a shift in his demeanor. "You're smiling more," she said one morning, leaning against his desk. "Am I?" Marcus replied, feigning ignorance. Emma smirked. "Something tells me Kane's going to regret underestimating you." Before Marcus could respond, Richard's voice boomed across the office floor. "Johnson, my office." "Now?" Marcus's stomach tightened as he followed Richard to the corner office. Inside, Richard closed the door and turned to face him. "Let's cut to the chase," Richard said, his tone sharp. "I know you've been working on something outside of company hours. Care to explain?" Marcus kept his face neutral. "I don't think my personal projects are relevant to my role here." Richard's eyes narrowed. "When you're employed at TechFuture, everything you do is relevant to this company, especially if it involves technology. Don't forget the fine print in your contract." Marcus clenched his jaw, but said nothing. "I'll make this simple," Richard continued. "Whatever you're working on, I want it on my desk by the end of the week. We'll evaluate its potential and decide if it's worth integrating into our portfolio. And if I don't?" Marcus asked, his voice steady. Richard's smirk returned. "Let's just say it won't end well for you." Marcus left the office, his mind racing. Richard didn't know the full extent of Project Sentinel, but his suspicions were enough to pose a threat. Marcus had to act quickly. That night, Marcus encrypted all of his files and moved critical data to a secure cloud server. He couldn't risk Richard accessing his work, especially now that it was gaining traction outside of TechFuture. As he sat in the glow of his laptop, Emma's words echoed in his mind. If there was ever a time to prove him wrong, it's now. Marcus closed his laptop with a determined sigh. "Game on, Kane," he muttered. The energy in the conference hall buzzed like a live wire. Marcus stood at the edge of the stage, the weight of his prototype resting heavily in his hands. This was it, his moment. The International Tech Summit was a proving ground for innovators, and Marcus was about to showcase Project Sentinel to a room filled with industry leaders, investors, and journalists. He took a steadying breath as the moderator called his name. Next, we have Marcus Johnson, presenting a cutting-edge solution for energy grid management. Please welcome him to the stage. The applause was polite, but tepid. Marcus adjusted his tie and walked onto the platform, his heart pounding. As the lights dimmed and his presentation screen lit up, he scanned the crowd. Among the faces was Richard Kane, seated near the back with a forced, tight-lipped smile. Marcus clenched his fists momentarily, forcing himself to focus. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Imagine a world where power outages are a thing of the past, where hospitals never lose electricity and businesses never halt operations due to grid failures. That's the world I aim to create with Project Sentinel." As Marcus walked the audience through the core mechanics of his AI-driven system, the murmurs began. He demonstrated live simulations, showing how the algorithm could predict and preemptively counteract grid failures with startling accuracy. Project Sentinel doesn't just react to problems, it prevents them, Marcus said, his confidence building with every passing second. The murmurs grew louder, this time tinged with excitement. A few heads nodded in approval. And then it happened. "Excuse me," a familiar voice cut through the room. Marcus froze mid-sentence as Richard Kane stood, his face a mask of feigned politeness. Richard Kane, CEO of TechFuture Incorporated, he introduced himself, though no one in the room needed the clarification. "I have a question for Mr. Johnson." The audience turned toward Richard, sensing tension. Marcus forced a smile. "Go ahead." Richard's voice dripped with condescension. "While your presentation is impressive, I can't help but notice that some of these ideas seem familiar. Specifically, they resemble internal projects from TechFuture. Could you clarify if this technology was developed independently?" The room fell silent. Marcus's chest tightened. He knew this was coming. Richard was playing dirty, using the platform to discredit him. Marcus met Richard's gaze head-on. "I can assure you, Project Sentinel was developed independently, outside of my employment at TechFuture." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Interesting, because some of these concepts align very closely with ideas that were discussed in our R&D department." Marcus felt his anger bubbling, but he kept his tone calm. "If TechFuture had similar ideas, I'd ask why they weren't pursued. Perhaps the leadership didn't see their potential?" A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Richard's jaw tightened, but he quickly recovered. "I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings," Richard said smoothly. "I'm sure the legal team at TechFuture will want to take a closer look at this." Marcus refused to let him steal the spotlight. "By all means," he said, his voice firm. "I've documented every step of my development process, from the first line of code to the final prototype. I have nothing to hide." Richard opened his mouth to retort, but a voice from the audience interrupted. "Can we let the man finish his presentation?" The crowd erupted in applause, and Richard, clearly outmaneuvered, sank back into his seat. Marcus returned to his presentation, his heart racing. Despite the interruption, he finished strong, receiving a standing ovation. Investors swarmed him after the session, eager to discuss partnerships. But Marcus knew the battle was far from over. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in a glass-walled conference room at the headquarters of Novagrid, one of the largest renewable energy companies in the country. Across the table sat a panel of executives, all visibly impressed by his pitch. "This is groundbreaking," said Samantha Reyes, the company's COO. "We've been looking for solutions like this for years, and nothing has come close to what you're offering." Marcus nodded, his confidence tempered by caution. He had been burned before. "I want to ensure that this partnership benefits both parties," Marcus said. "This isn't just about selling technology. It's about creating a lasting impact." Samantha smiled. "We agree. Let's finalize the terms and make history." As Marcus left the meeting, his phone buzzed. It was Emma. "Did you see the news?" she asked, her voice laced with urgency. "No, what's going on?" "Richard just announced TechFuture's new initiative, a predictive AI system for energy grids. They're calling it GridGuard." Marcus's stomach dropped. "Are you kidding me? They're saying it's been in development for years," Emma continued. "But we both know what's really happening." Marcus gritted his teeth. "He's trying to discredit me before I can launch." The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and press inquiries. Marcus's small team of advisors worked tirelessly to counter TechFuture's narrative. And then the bombshell dropped. An anonymous whistleblower from TechFuture leaked internal emails to the press. The documents revealed that Richard Kane had suppressed Marcus's initial pitch and attempted to plagiarize elements of Project Sentinel for his own initiative. The story went viral. Headlines read, "David versus Goliath. Engineer exposes corporate greed." Richard's carefully constructed image began to crumble. Board members distanced themselves from him, investors demanded answers, and employees started speaking out about the toxic culture at TechFuture. For Marcus, vindication was sweet, but he didn't revel in it. His focus remained on launching Project Sentinel. On launch day, Marcus stood before a massive audience at Novagrid's headquarters. The event was live-streamed globally, a testament to the anticipation surrounding his innovation. "This isn't just a product," Marcus said, his voice steady. "It's a promise. A promise to create a more reliable, sustainable future for everyone." The crowd erupted in applause as the first demonstration went live. Power grids across 3 cities reported increased efficiency and stability, validating everything Marcus had worked for. Backstage, Samantha approached him with a smile. "Congratulations. You've done something incredible here." Marcus nodded, a rare moment of pride washing over him. But as he looked out at the cheering crowd, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The headlines in the tech world continued to shine a spotlight on Marcus Johnson. His success with Project Sentinel had transformed him from an unknown engineer to a household name in innovation. Yet, while the world celebrated Marcus's ingenuity, a storm brewed behind the scenes. TechFuture was in chaos. Investors were withdrawing, public trust was eroding, and internal leaks painted a grim picture of Richard Kane's leadership. For the first time in his career, Richard was losing control, and it infuriated him. Marcus sat in his new office at Novagrid's headquarters, a far cry from the cramped apartment where he had built Project Sentinel. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline, but Marcus's focus was on the flurry of documents spread across his desk. Emma, who had recently joined Marcus's team, walked in with a concerned expression. "Got a minute?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Marcus nodded. "What's up?" She handed him a tablet. "Richard's making moves again. He just announced a press conference, and word is, he's planning to discredit you publicly. Apparently, TechFuture's legal team is doubling down, claiming you stole proprietary technology." Marcus's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the article on the screen. "This is a last-ditch effort," Emma continued. "They're desperate." Marcus set the tablet down and leaned back in his chair. "Desperate or not, they can still cause damage. I've spent too much time proving myself to let Richard drag my name through the mud again." Emma crossed her arms, her voice firm. "Then we fight back. We've got the evidence. The leaked emails, the whistleblower statements, it's all there. If he wants a war, we're ready." Marcus hesitated. While he wanted to expose Richard's lies, he wasn't eager to turn the situation into a public spectacle. His work had always been about innovation, not corporate drama. "Let's hold off," Marcus said finally. "We'll monitor the press conference, but we won't engage unless he crosses a line. I don't want to stoop to his level." Emma nodded reluctantly. "All right. But if he tries to smear you, we're not holding back." The press conference was streamed live, and Marcus watched from his office. Richard stood at a podium, his usual smug confidence on full display. "TechFuture has always been at the forefront of innovation," Richard began, his tone polished. "Recently, we've faced baseless accusations from individuals who've chosen to profit from ideas that originated within our company." Marcus's fists clenched as Richard continued. "These individuals, like Marcus Johnson, have taken proprietary concepts discussed in our R&D meetings and rebranded them as their own. While we respect his technical skills, the truth is that Project Sentinel was inspired by internal initiatives at TechFuture. We are pursuing all legal avenues to protect our intellectual property." Richard's words sent a ripple through the media, and the reporters in the room fired off questions. "Mr. Kane, do you have evidence to support these claims?" one journalist asked. Richard smiled, feigning confidence. "We have documentation and records. However, we won't disclose specifics until the legal process unfolds. Marcus turned off the screen, his stomach churning. This is exactly what I expected, he muttered. The fallout from the press conference was immediate. Social media lit up with debates, and reporters flooded Marcus's inbox with requests for comments. But what TechFuture didn't anticipate was the public's growing mistrust of Richard Kane. The leaked emails had already tarnished his reputation, and many viewed his accusations as an attempt to shift blame. Employees from TechFuture continued to come forward with stories of Richard's unethical behavior, adding fuel to the fire. Despite the noise, Marcus stayed focused. NovaGrid's implementation of Project Sentinel was expanding, with pilot programs rolling out in cities across the country. The results were undeniable: reduced energy failures, increased efficiency, and significant cost savings. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Richard had another move to play. A week later, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. "Marcus Johnson," he answered, his tone cautious. "Marcus, it's Richard Kane." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you want?" Richard's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I think it's time we talked. Face to face." "I have nothing to say to you," Marcus replied. "I think you'll want to hear this," Richard said. "Let's meet tomorrow. My office." "Noon." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to refuse, but curiosity got the better of him. "Fine," he said finally. The next day, Marcus entered TechFuture's headquarters for the first time since his departure. The atmosphere was different now, quieter, less bustling. The company's struggles were evident in the empty desks and subdued expressions of the employees he passed. Richard's office was as grand as ever, but the man behind the desk looked worn. His usual arrogance was still there, but it was muted, overshadowed by the pressure he was under. "Marcus," Richard said, standing to shake his hand. Marcus ignored the gesture. "What do you want?" Richard smirked, gesturing for Marcus to sit. Straight to the point. "I always admired that about you." Marcus didn't move. "I'm not here to play games, Richard. If you have something to say, say it." Richard leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "TechFuture is in trouble. You know that. And while I could sit here and argue about who's to blame, the fact is, we need a solution." "I need a solution." Marcus crossed his arms. "And you think I'm going to help you after everything you've done?" Richard chuckled dryly. "I'm offering you an opportunity. Partner with us. Merge Project Sentinel with TechFuture. Together, we could dominate the market." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." "I'm serious," Richard said. "You've proven yourself, Marcus. I'll give you that. But you don't have the infrastructure to scale this globally. TechFuture does. And what happens when you rebrand My Work Is Yours again?" Marcus shot back. Richard's expression hardened. "This isn't about the past. It's about the future. Think about it. With your tech and our resources, we could revolutionize the industry." Marcus shook his head. "I'd rather fail on my own than succeed with someone like you." He turned to leave, but Richard's next words stopped him in his tracks. "If you walk out that door, TechFuture won't survive," Richard said. "And when it falls, thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Are you willing to let that happen?" Marcus paused, his mind racing. Richard was manipulative, but there was truth in his words. If TechFuture collapsed, countless people like Emma, who had once worked there, would pay the price. Marcus turned back, his expression unreadable. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Richard nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Take your time. But don't wait too long." As Marcus walked out of the office, he couldn't shake the weight of the decision before him. Marcus sat alone in his apartment, the weight of Richard's offer hanging heavy in the air. The past months had been a whirlwind: vindication, success, and the dismantling of Richard Kane's empire. But now, he faced a decision that could define not just his future, but the fate of thousands of employees and the trajectory of the industry. He sipped his coffee, staring out the window as the city buzzed below. For years, Marcus had dreamed of standing on his own, proving his worth in a world that constantly underestimated him. Yet Richard's words echoed in his mind. If TechFuture falls, Thousands of employees will lose their jobs. Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You look like you haven't slept in days. Marcus turned to see her standing in the doorway of his home office, a concerned look on her face. I haven't, he admitted. Is this about Richards? Marcus nodded, running a hand through his hair.
He's playing the moral card now,
saying that if I don't help, I'll be responsible for the fallout. Emma scoffed, crossing her arms. That man has been exploiting people for years, and now he wants you to save him? After everything he's done to you? It's not about him, Marcus said quietly. It's about the people at TechFuture. Not everyone there is like Richard. Some of them are just like I was, overlooked, undervalued, trying to make a difference. Emma softened, her voice gentle. And what about you, Marcus? Haven't you sacrificed enough for this? You finally built something on your own. Don't let him drag you back. Marcus sighed. I don't trust him. But I can't ignore the opportunity to make things right, for the people, not for him. The next morning, Marcus called Richard. I'll meet with the board, Marcus said. But I have conditions. Of course, Richard replied, his tone smug. We'll discuss them in person. At TechFuture's headquarters, Marcus walked into the boardroom with the confidence of a man who knew his worth. The board members watched him carefully, some wary, others hopeful. Richard sat at the head of the table, a faint smirk on his face. Marcus stood at the other end of the room, his voice clear and steady. Before we talk about any merger or partnership, let's be clear about one thing. This isn't about saving TechFuture. This is about creating a future that works for everyone. If I'm going to collaborate with this company, it will be on my terms. Richard leaned back in his chair, masking his irritation. And what are your terms, Marcus? First, Marcus began, I want complete creative and operational control over Project Sentinel. This technology isn't going to be watered down or manipulated to fit someone else's agenda. The board murmured among themselves, but no one objected. Second, Marcus continued, TechFuture must undergo a full restructuring. That includes replacing executives who have fostered a toxic culture of exploitation and dishonesty. Richard's smirk faltered. Let's not get carried away. Marcus cut him off. I'm not negotiating on this. You've built your career by taking credit for the work of others. That stops now. If you want my technology, you step down. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Richard, whose face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous, Richard snapped. You can't expect me to. You asked for my terms, Marcus said calmly. These are my terms. Take them or leave them. The board erupted into whispered debates. One member, a woman who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. Mr. Kane, she said, her voice firm, perhaps it's time to consider what's best for the company, not just yourself. Richard glared at her, but the murmurs of agreement around the table made it clear he was losing control. After a long pause, Richard stood. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. I'll step down. The restructuring of TechFuture was swift. Richard Kane's resignation made headlines, and Marcus was appointed as Chief Innovation Officer, overseeing all technological development. His first act was to implement policies that encouraged collaboration, transparency, and recognition for all contributors. For the employees of TechFuture, the shift was palpable. Departments that had once been silos began working together, and fresh ideas flowed freely. Emma joined the team as a senior engineer, bringing her experience and integrity to the new era of the company. Project Sentinel continued to expand globally, transforming energy management and earning accolades for its impact. Cities around the world reported fewer outages and lower energy costs, proving that Marcus's vision wasn't just revolutionary, it was necessary. Months later, Marcus stood on a stage at an industry awards ceremony, the spotlight warm on his face. As he accepted the award for Technological Achievement of the Year, he paused to address the crowd. This award isn't just for me, he said. It's for every innovator who was told their ideas were impossible, for every employee who was overlooked, every voice that was silenced. Innovation isn't about ego or power, it's about people. And when we lift each other up, we create a future that works for everyone. The audience erupted into applause, but Marcus didn't bask in it. His gaze swept across the room, filled with faces that reminded him of where he had been and where he was now. As the applause faded, Marcus stepped off the stage, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had won, not just against Richard Kane, but against the system that tried to hold him back. And in doing so, he had built something far greater than technology. He had built a legacy.